Those little peaks keep building and building, but the fretboard, the notes on the fretboard are from about 93, 96 hertz to around 1K. So it's, so those peaks, and this was a good guitar. This was Courtney Hartman's Brazilian Dread when it was brand new. So those peaks represent the major resonant frequencies in that guitar. As they are filtered through the top and the characteristics of the sound chamber of the air cavity. So am I making sense here? Is this all kind of? I'm not losing anyone. I haven't gotten too wonky yet. So. Number 4, tap tones. A tap tone is when you tap on the top here. We'll be doing that. A tap tone should...
Like in this case. Right, I have here, in my guitar I have a G sharp. This is tap tone. The top tune properly will distribute all the harmonics properly, of course.
be complex, pleasing, and musical. What do I mean by that?
This is interesting, this thing. Look.
We'll be doing that. A tap tone should be complex, pleasing, and musical. What do I mean by that? I started looking at, on the internet at various other musical instrument makers and how they tune instruments. And one area where there's a lot of information is marimba making. Marimba makers try to tune each key not only to a note but to at least 3 overtones. And some people will do more and claim to do more or whatever, and they have a very specific method of doing it. So if I just kind of get a note out of this thing when I'm tapping it, holding it and tapping it in a certain area, that note is, it's great to get a note, but it's even better to get a note that's musical and full. And what I mean by that is that particular note has associated overtones that it's capable of generating just because of the way the bracing is shaped.
Wow.
Sets of marimba bars, you can see they're scooped out. They have they look a little bit different in size. The lower bars are the lower notes and the higher bars are the higher notes. Here's a little thing that just simply shows you can adjust the fundamental by the scoop. In the middle, the 4th harmonic can be adjusted by the areas 2, and then the 10th harmonic can be adjusted by the areas indicated by the 3, and so on. Again, I'm not so much interested in the physics of it as I am interested in the illustration that this can be done. And it's done systematically.
Amazing.
And even, I always used to think that if you remove wood, you'll always lower the pitch. If something gets more flexible, you lower the pitch, and that often happens. But there are ways of actually raising the pitch by, like, for example, in a marimba bar, you play around with you play around with the voicing too much, and then the fundamental goes out. If you want to, it gets too low by you scooped out too much. So you've changed the fundamental pitch. Well, you can bring it back by taking a little bit off the end here. So there's little ways of doing these things. And what I want to show you is that these scallop braces are nothing but marimba bars.
Wow. This is amazing, but in fact it is true. Look at what extent the research of this gentleman went on. So, just like the marimba's tune, this is so important. It defines what is a good instrument. And of course, unless you have certain training and a big culture about the subject, you cannot know it. Just because it's this or that brand or this, you cannot know it like that. This is why people pay the price for a great instrument. That's why. Because it has all these invisible details, these things that you cannot see there, because are not evident, are subtle, but there is a whole deal of work behind. So this point of the marimba is amazing. This I really like it, because it's a perspective. I never heard someone comparing the marimba parts with the fan bracing of a guitar.
On the voicing too much, and then the fundamental goes out. If you want to, it gets too low by you scooped out too much. So you've changed the fundamental pitch. Well, you can bring it back by taking a little bit off the end here. So there's little ways of doing these things. And what I want to show you is that these scallop braces are nothing but marimba bars. Couple of things. We're going to get a little wonky here, so I'll blast through this. This is an out-of-phase waveform. You will be tapping this, and you'll hear the same notes a lot in here. If you get two notes that are out of phase, what happens? They cancel.
They cancel each other.
So sometimes, if you're just trying to make a fuller sounding top, just by changing something, you've gone from two notes that are actually canceling each other to two separate notes. And all of a sudden it gets very full. That explains why you can remove a little bit of wood, and all of a sudden it sounds fantastic. And then there's another phenomenon here. It's called beating. And how many mandolin players out there? What happens when your two E strings are not quite in tune? They sound nasty because they're beating. And that can also happen when you're voicing a guitar. Two notes that are too close to each other can give you just a nasty.
This is extremely important
because they're beating. There's another phenomenon here.
This is this. So what he means is this. It will have the perfect tuning of E and E. And if these two are not properly tuned, then it will happen this thing. Or and this is inside the top of the guitar, without you playing any string. This is what is the matter of this. That's why an instrument is a sacred thing.
It's called beating. And how many mandolin players out there? What happens when your two E strings are not quite in tune? They sound nasty because they're beating. And that can also happen when you're voicing a guitar. Two notes that are too close to each other can give you just a nasty sound. And so...
Right. So in this case, of course, he meant this. Over two exact same notes. This here. So, because so mandolins have, and mandolin have double strings. So, if this is not in tune, then, or say, this is the problem. Happens on some lower frequencies, but any note which is cancelling itself. So if the top is wrong made by an ignorant fellow who thinks his name will save him from this because it belongs to the dynasty and such, we don't care. We care about knowledge and about this what is the fact of the harmonic series and how this is translated into the top and the bracings of the guitar. That's why this is. Otherwise, it's a basic raw luthier conception. So such an ignorant fellow, right? And then generally very puffed up, by the way. So no, not anymore. Now things are advancing and they are doing marvelous things. And the topmost equation will be when we use this kind of top as opposed to the center sound hole, which is so much inferior to this, even in cutaway guitars. Of course, it's a great guitar as well, but in order to cancel problems of these self-canceling frequencies, this sound port is extremely useful. And a guitar without that is totally obsolete, in my opinion, right? Why? Because, well, the thing about Simplicio said is because this is the Stradivari of the guitar. Around the 1929, he presented this idea of challenging just the very structure of the center sound hole. Why? Because here we have so much more vibration. This is the fact in all this space than if we have a center sound hole. So center sound hole is also an obsolete idea to me, right? And of course, well, Simplicio made 9 of these guitars. Nobody wanted it then, but now AG is making this again in this model, and also the original Simplicio shape, which is this one here. And this creates a fantastic division between trebles and basses, and it has also the lateral sound port as well. So like here you can see, so this is the Simplicio 1 like this, and then this offers so much field to vibrate and presents a very powerful harmonic series. Of course, this here, guitar Maestro Marco. It's even in the cutaway, which has so much less wood, this is totally revolutionary as opposed to the center sound hole. Though this is a great guitar also, but the concept of dividing that, which Simplicio introduced, for example, here this is a link. I will post this also in the description, from the Museum of Musical Instruments in Boston, Massachusetts. And here you can see some of the history about how this idea was created there. This is revolutionary because it offers all this field to vibrate as opposed to the contracted center sample. But anyway, the research has to be done in both. And this person was an expert in center sample guitars, of course, before he came up with this great idea.
That's, just experience tells you two notes that are actually canceling each other to two separate notes. And all of a sudden it gets very full. That explains why you can remove a little bit of wood and all of a sudden it sounds fantastic. And then there's another phenomenon here. It's called beating. And how many mandolin players out there? What happens when your two E strings are not quite in tune? They sound nasty because they're beating. And that can also happen when you're voicing a guitar. Two notes that are too close to each other can give you just a nasty sound. And so that's, just experience tells you, when to separate those two notes by voicing, but it's one of the things that we try to do. Voicing method. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to flex the top along and across the grain and evaluate its stiffness and its weight. I'm going to hold and tap from a variety of locations and evaluate the frequency distribution. And then I'm going to shape the braces, regularly evaluating stiffness and frequency distribution. And my voicing is complete when the top is springy, equally along and across the grain and at the edges of the top. Now by springy I mean it is the top is the right stiffness for the string load, and that's kind of a thing that we could measure that with with a weight or something. But if you build enough of these things, you can measure it this way too. It is complete when frequency distribution is optimized for the top and for the chosen design, and when the tap tones are strong, clear, and musical. Probably stop there. I got a couple of other things, but that describes what I'm going to try to do.
I will say that in Spain, nobody has
so you can look at it.
that knowledge, that much knowledge, or that much, or even 10% of that. Because here, you cannot talk with one luthier that knows about this stuff of frequencies. Because the proof is they keep doing the same thing of what they don't know is the same because they are so much into it. With these so-called ebony fretboards, doing the same stuff as always. Now, thanks to Beben, in AG is different, but except for them in Spain, nobody is doing any research like that. So this is very relevant. And now, of course, he will show his method and how, in fact, this carving thing produces different effects.
Some different notes there. Kind of a bunch of the same notes. That's what I mean by a full note. Here's another nice full note. So we got a little bit of variety here, but there's difference in quality of the notes. And it's too damn stiff. So I've got to in order for that guitar to be lively, mechanically lively, I've got to get it to the right stiffness. But as I'm working it down to that stiffness, I've got to make sure I keep a good distribution. And I'm just quickly removing material that just isn't going to be there on any guitar. you guys can probably mostly see what I'm working on here. This is a nice. I would never work at a table that low, you know, but it's good. I can handle doing just one guitar this way. At the end of the day, the X brace and the upper transverse bar will tie into the lining, and the ends of these braces here will just kind of feather away to nothing and tuck under the lining. Now, these peaks are a little on the high side for an OM. These are both OM tops. The peaks are a little high because we use dreadnought braces. We already have about, it seems like we've got 30 different shaper jigs to make these braces, and we could, this is why I want to go to the CNC. So we put dreadnought braces on OMs, and then we carve them down to OM sizes before voicing. That's kind of
very interesting.
How many body sizes do we make, James?
I think 16?
Something like that, so that's a lot of different braces.
Yeah, and then are infinite forms of braces, if you know.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, now I'm sort of getting kind of close to the zone of where I would start with if I made OM braces. Actually, let's take these guys down. There's another part of my, I think I will go on to the next part of my slideshow. See these three cross sections? Those three cross sections are all capable of carrying the same load. The triangular cross section is about almost a third lighter than the rectangular cross section. So we want the top to be light enough to vibrate freely. So most braces are triangularly shaped. You can remove an awful lot of wood no one makes like a real sharp triangle except Gibson because you can cut them on a table saw. Most braces are more like a parabola kind of shape, so that's where they ended up, which is a lot closer to the triangle than it is to the rectangle. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take a bunch of these braces and I'm going to just thin them out a little bit. And turn them into a little more of a triangular cross section. Basically, all of this stuff that I'm removing isn't going to affect the stiffness that much.
Don't forget the fact that this is after you know what to glue first. That's another thing. And then people expect cheap guitars. This guitar like that cannot be cheap, obviously. It's obvious.
Before I left.
Because look all the time it takes to do just the top, right?
Luego que descubrí ahí la improvisación. La improvisación es algo que yo pienso que cada músico del estilo que sea, del clásico, del flamenco, de cualquier otra música debería aprender, porque en la improvisación te da mucha libertad y a la vez te da mucho conocimiento de dónde estás tocando, de cómo estás tocando, de qué armonías están en cada momento, ¿no?
Muy bien. Pablo. Sí, Paco, ¿qué es para usted la música popular y qué es la música elitista?
Yo creo que la música elitista es el refinamiento de la música popular. Por ejemplo, el flamenco. El flamenco originalmente es una música popular, la música del pueblo de Andalucía. Pero creo que ya no le pertenece más al pueblo, porque de pronto habemos gente que nos hemos pasado toda una vida encerrados, puliendo esa expresión popular. Entonces ha llegado a un nivel en el que el pueblo ya no tiene acceso, sobre todo a los matices que vamos consiguiendo la gente como yo, que nos pasamos muchas horas elaborando esa música.